It's our great pleasure to welcome now Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Douglas, always good to see you, sir. Thanks for coming in.
Gerard, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, man. So we were just talking offline. As you know, I was up in Washington in the swamp, as they say, a couple of days ago. What an incredible event that was, and just so cool to participate. But you were just telling me you were there not so long ago as well.
Yeah, I was invited up for a meeting in the West Wing a couple of weeks ago with some of Trump's policy team. And it was wonderful, great opportunity to talk about the wonderful things happening in Mississippi. I wouldn't use the phrase, make Mississippi great again. We're already great. But some of the things we're doing to really move Mississippi forward. I mean, here's one thing I was telling them. In the past 5 years in Mississippi, there has been more economic growth than in the previous 15. And this is as a result of some of the public policy changes that are happening here in Mississippi. So it was great to be able to talk about that and talk about that story.
So do you feel like that the administration, the folks you met with, Douglas, were they just curious about, hey, what are you guys doing down there that's driving all this success?
Yeah, I think they're interested in two things. They're interested in what you might call the Southern success story. And I think they're also specifically interested in Mississippi. I think it's caught their attention. I mean, goodness knows, we've got a governor who's on Fox News often enough talking about this. I think they're beginning to ask, hey, what is it about Mississippi, the supposed 50th out of 50, that makes Mississippi unusual? Why is Mississippi doing these things and succeeding? So I spent time at the White House talking about that, and then I went to various think tanks across D.C. and was similarly invited to talk about it too. You know, income tax abolition, labor market deregulation, all the inward investment. It's a great story to be able to tell. Yeah, it is. And you're right. The governor has rightfully been promoting and touting the successes here in Mississippi, and he should. I mean, he's the chief spokesperson for our state, and he should let the world know about these many accomplishments. Now, your organization has been recognizing some members of the legislature for some of their standout accomplishments as well. Tell us about that. I don't think we thank lawmakers enough when they do the right thing. We're all quick to criticize those lawmakers who are the roadblock to reform, and boy, do I sometimes do that. But we don't thank people enough. I mean, take, for example, a lawmaker like Sam Creekmore or Hank Zuber or Trey Lamar. Mm-hmm. These guys have been working... All in the House, by the way. All in the House, or Angela Hill in the Senate. Yeah. They've been working away tirelessly on complex areas of reform. In Trey's case, it was income tax elimination. In the case of Sam Creekmore and Hank Zuber, it was to do with getting rid of all the red tape that holds back the healthcare sector. They put in long hours, and it's a thankless task. And yet they put in the real hard work. The media doesn't always cover it, but it's a huge amount of detail for them. And I don't think we thank them enough. And they don't always succeed. Hank and Sam Creekmore's bill, sadly, was largely filleted by the forces of the status quo in the Senate. But I think we should thank them, and I think we should celebrate them. And I think we should say when a lawmaker makes the effort to stand up for freedom and liberty and the things that we need to get Mississippi moving, we should publicly thank them and acknowledge them. So we had the Mississippi Freedom Awards this year. We had 6 lawmakers, and it was wonderful to celebrate that success. Okay. Six different individuals in the legislature. Yeah, if I remember correctly, Jason White, House hero. Speaker of the House. Angela Hill in the Senate, Sam Creekmore, Hank Zuber, Trey Lamar, and, of course, Jensen Owen, another person who heroically works away in the background delivering things that really need to change. Highly focused on some school choice options. Unfortunately, that met its fate in the Senate and did not become law. Again, a similar story, the roadblock to reform in the Senate. There's a pattern emerging here. Good ideas go out of the House with lots of energy behind them to improve the state of Mississippi, and they go to the Senate and they're killed there. Now, the Senate leadership would have us believe that they died in committee, as though they were sort of lost under a pile of memos in the chairman's office. No. They were intentionally killed by the lieutenant governor and the Senate leadership, which is, I think, really sad for Mississippi. But I think people are beginning to see this. And as they see that these reforms that we need to grow Mississippi are being strangled intentionally in the Senate, I think people will begin to become restless and want change. Okay.
Interesting. So let's talk about the school choice issue. That's something that your organization advocates for. You know, I'm affiliated with an organization that's been doing the same. And it just seems like that every year we run against the same objections and obstacles and can't seem to get across the finish line. Jansen Owen's legislation, House Bill 1435, very straightforward. It would just implement portability, public school portability.
Look at it this way. We're surrounded by 4 states that now have universal school choice, by which you can take public money to any school you want in one of those 4 states. What we're asking for in Mississippi is not yet that.
We're not at that level.
Given that last year we gave reform so that every child in Mississippi in the public school system has a dedicated budget, a dedicated number of tax dollars that is their money. All we've been asking for is that they can take that money from any public school to any other public school.
Yeah.
And even that has been blocked. And it's been blocked on the most spurious and fatuous grounds by people who, frankly, don't want to see their multi-million-pound budgets spent in the interests of the child and the student and the money going into the classroom. They want to keep their bureaucratic empire intact. And it's basically a struggle between the education bureaucrats, the fat cats, many of whom receive larger salaries in the public sector than the governor gets. It's the fat cats against the parents, and we've got to stand up for parent power.
Yeah, it's disappointing that didn't even get brought up for a vote in committee by Senate.
It got through the House. This is
talking about in the Senate, though.
But it's really important to acknowledge that it got through the House.
Agreed.
It's the first time it's ever got through the House, and it went through the House with a 2-to-1 majority, which is great.
Yeah.
And I think it bodes well for the future, because the coming people in Mississippi, the people who are standing up for ordinary Mississippians, left behind Mississippians, now have the bit between their teeth on this.
Yeah.
They will bring the issue back, and if any Republicans or notional Republicans running the Senate want to explain to tens of thousands of parents in Mississippi why they are going to stand in the way of good conservative policy and not allow Mississippi families the choices they have in neighboring states, I think they will be on a losing ticket.
So something I have really yet to even talk about on the show is that the state of Texas has also been trying to work through getting some school choice legislation through, and the governor, Greg Abbott, a big proponent of it. They just passed rather sweeping legislation in the House in Texas. Not sure what happens, kind of similar to Mississippi in the Senate. But this is something that Governor Abbott is really full force behind.
Abbott's completely on board with it. I mean, this is something that ought to unite every kind of conservative, from your traditional Reagan conservatives to your MAGA red hat conservatives. This is about giving parents control over their tax dollars. It ought to be, uncontroversial. The reason why we see it constantly frustrated and thwarted is because we have a Senate leadership that is opposed to this core policy. Now, they'll come on air, Gerald, they've come on your show, I think, and cryptically implied that they're in favour of this. And then, whoopsie-daisy, it died in committee. No, that won't do. They intentionally are standing in the way of this core conservative policy. Now, if Delbert Hosemann wants to come out and say he's against school choice, he should come out and say he's against school choice. Let's have that debate. But what won't stand is this idea that he's somehow in favour of it, but whoops, it dies in committees under Chairman here.
I actually think he is opposed to school choice.
I think so.
He did indicate on the show and in other interview settings that he supports some sort of limited public-to-public portability, limited in that for what he described on this show as students that are trapped in failing districts.
There's always wordplay and sophistry.
That's right. Yeah. And so we didn't really get anything done there. That's my understanding, is that he was actually disappointed that a bill didn't emerge from the Senate committee that, as you know, is chaired by Senator Dennis DeBar. Yeah. Expected to get something out of that. Okay, so let's talk about some of these other members. We talked about Jansen and his efforts there with respect to school choice. What about Creekmore, Representative Sam Creekmore? What did he do to get your attention?
Well, certificate of need. 2 lawmakers, Sam Creekmore and Hank Zuber.
Yeah.
A year ago, they set up a committee to look at the issue of so-called certificate of need. It's a technical term for saying that if you run a healthcare facility and you want to expand it, you need, or you want to invest in a healthcare facility, you need a permit.
Yeah.
It's a Soviet-type system, and it's protectionist, and it intentionally restricts healthcare.
Yep.
Creekmore and Zuber quietly looked at the detail, they took evidence from witnesses, and they came up with a bill that would remove a lot of the restrictions and the red tape.
Okay.
And I think they've done a great job. Now, they were frustrated and they were prevented from doing everything they wanted, but for the first time in Mississippi's history, in 40 years of Certificate of Need, we finally have a bill that has actually begun to address the problem.
Yeah. All right, if you can hang around, we keep talking. We've got Douglas Carswell. He's the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. We're in the Element Wealth studio, coming right back. Studio, we're visiting with Douglas Carswell, president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. I want to share this on the C-Spire text line. I don't want tax dollars going to 99% white schools with unqualified teachers in districts with good public schools. So a couple of things I would say in response to that. First thing is, it's a little bit, I think, misguided to refer to it as tax dollars. We're really talking about the dollars allocated to each student. So it's really more the dollars that we're giving some control to parents to determine how best to invest the public money associated with their student, not just widespread global tax dollars, just that applies to the student. And by the way, that's $7,000 roughly per student in Mississippi. It's $10,000 per student in Texas, the state's portion, by the way. So of that, but you know, this deal with the white and the black and all that sort of stuff. Here's the deal: nobody's going to sign up for an education savings account or portability to transfer to another school if they're already in a good school. Yeah. That's likely not to happen. So it's not like we're sort of detracting money away from a good school to a different school. If it's a good school, people are going to stay there. We're trying to help those that are trapped. I don't mean to steal what you are here to talk about, but am I right on this, Douglas?
Absolutely. I mean, the people who would benefit most from this would be a family or a mum in Hinds County who had a child who couldn't afford to go private, who would move if they could to a school with a better catchment area but simply couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
By giving them control of that $7,000, they would be able to go to schools like Redeemer, like Vineyard.
Yeah.
It's about helping them. It's not about subsidizing private schools.
And I actually believe that the parents or the caretakers, as the case may be, of the students that are most likely to participate are the very ones you want to help.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the ones who are going to benefit from this, and they're trapped now.
If you're happy with the school you've got, great, stay. This won't affect you. It won't change it.
Yeah.
If you're not happy, you can do something about it. It's as simple as that. So, you know, I don't think people can complain and say, well, everyone's happy with the way things are. You might be happy. Great, stay. But for those who are not happy, this gives them an alternative.
And, of course, the other thing that we should point out is that part of the rationale for this is to send the message to the poor-performing schools, you got to up your game here. You're going to lose students, and they should respond. I mean, it's just simple competitive threat and pressure.
Yeah, and but I think the slam-dunk argument is that we're now surrounded.
That's true.
Every family in Arkansas can now do this. Every family in Alabama. In a few months' time, every family in Tennessee will be able to do it. In a year's or so's time, most families in Louisiana. Why can't we?
And the president fully supports this as well. In fact, he appointed someone to serve, Linda McMahon, as Cabinet Secretary of Education, whose primary job is to dissolve the department that she oversees.
Yeah. And he tweets about this. He tweets, I mean, I've never seen a president show as much interest in legislation being passed in Tennessee or Texas or Louisiana as Trump seems to show when it comes to school choice.
Yeah.
And if this issue comes up either in the special session or in the 2026 session, do not assume he's not going to be following this. He will be following this very closely.
Totally agree. All right, so let's continue the discussion about the Certificate of Need laws that we have in Mississippi that are we're one of the remaining states that have those in place. And they're somewhat onerous, but the bottom line is you got to say, Mother, may I get permission from the state government to do things like buy an MRI machine or expand your parking lot, add some more rooms into your hospital, stand up an emergency room, stuff like that.
The whole system was brought in to protect existing businesses and keep out the competition. I mean, imagine if there was a law that said, if Papa John's wanted to open a new restaurant, they needed to get permission from Pizza Hut. That would be crazy, right? Yet that's what you have with healthcare. And as a result, it means that in Mississippi, you have a small number of... Take, for example, kidney dialysis. If you need kidney dialysis, you've got a monopoly provider in Mississippi. And that's probably one of the reasons why, if you need kidney dialysis in Mississippi, you have to go to a kidney dialysis center, whereas in most normal parts of the world where you have competition and choice, they bring a portable dialysis machine to your home. So it's less accessible, it's less good quality care. And the reason why we have it is because the existing providers want to keep out the competition.
Yeah.
I listened to one of the people giving evidence, and he basically said, if we get rid of the certificate of need laws, we might have to start paying our staff a proper wage because someone else, they might go and work for someone else. So it's wrong in all sorts of ways.
Yeah, I mean, what I would have given to have that sort of protectionism when I was in business, it was a wide open free for all. Anybody could sell anything to anybody virtually. So,
and I get it that some people look at the big hospitals in Hinds County and Jackson, and they're fearful that if you got rid of all certificate of need law overnight, it might have implications for the future of the 3 big healthcare providers in Jackson. I get that. That's why the Creekmore-Zuber proposal was so sensible, because it started with the things where reform would only have an upside, not any downside.
Yeah.
But we've got something through the legislature. It's not much, but it's a template to follow, and we need kidney dialysis. I think is, for me, the real biggie.
We got a little crack through there.
Yeah.
Bottom line, yes, we didn't get just complete wholesale repeal.
Yeah.
But we made some progress there, which is, and I think, did we end up increasing the threshold for capex?
Yeah.
I think as well, right? That required permission.
Yeah. But that was basically it. But the initial bill included kidney dialysis and psychiatric and all the rest of it. But I think we need to come back with that either in a special session or 2026.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see more progress there. So let's talk about Representative Chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, Trey Lamar, and Speaker of the House, Jason White. I'm assuming that tax reform may have some play there. Huh?
Not just tax reform.
Okay.
I think we all know that they pioneered the elimination of the income tax. It's the style of politics that I think makes them so significant. Instead of cooking up a plan for tax reform behind closed doors, they had a public meeting in September last year. They invited everyone in Mississippi to come along, and they did it openly, and they built a consensus. And what they came up with initially probably wasn't perfect. There was back and forth. There was a bit of compromise. People chipped in. Because they did it openly, they got the math right.
Yeah.
Whereas when the Senate tried to do it with the triggers, they got the math wrong. And this style of openness that you see from Trey Lamar and Jason White, I think also helps explain why we didn't see a budget passed. For years in Mississippi, there's been an understanding that they will fix the budget behind closed doors in a weekend. And I think White and Lamar and this new generation of Mississippi leaders say, no, that's not how you decide how to spend $7 billion of taxpayer money. Many of your listeners will be familiar with the idea of a booster club in their school. You wouldn't put up with the people who run the booster club making decisions about spending the few hundred or few $1,000s for the booster club in private and in secret. So why would you allow your politicians to cook up the budget behind closed doors on a weekend? And White and co. have insisted that actually the budget is done openly and transparently. And this is why the Senate was unable to agree, and this is why there needs to be a special session. But I think this new way of doing politics in Mississippi that White and Lamar and co. are pioneering, I think it's so different from the good old boy behind closed doors, you scratch my back, I scratch yours way of doing things. And this is why I think their role is more than just about income tax elimination. It's a transparency that I think anyone under the age of 50 in Mississippi wants to see.
Okay. Fair enough. So ultimately, we got a bill passed that will phase out the income tax, albeit over an extended period of time.
Yeah.
That's the way it ended. What do you think about that?
The key in all of this is going to be, can we control the increase in public spending? Can we restrain public spending? If we continue to have budget surpluses, after 2030, we will eliminate the income tax. If we continue to spend taxpayer money like a drunken sailor, we've had a 24% increase in state government spending in 5 years, then that will erode the capacity to do that. So I think it's great news. It's really good. Now, the Senate, many of your listeners will know, designed a tax trigger. And the idea of the tax trigger was that after 2030, there would only be further reductions in the income tax rate if there were certain criteria met. And the trigger was designed to never be pulled. They rather gloriously got their math wrong and put the decimal point in the wrong place, so that ploy didn't work. So we will see the elimination of the income tax, provided we don't continue to spend money wildly. So we need to restrain public spending in Mississippi.
Look, we can continue that discussion on the other side of the break if you'd like.
I'd love to.
Yeah, we've got Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, in the Element Wealth Studio. We're coming right back. Wealth Studio, it's Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So we were talking about spending, and of course in Mississippi, roughly 53% of our general fund goes to public education. And then next on the list in terms of spending categories is, of course, our share of Medicaid, which is upwards of almost 20%, I think, now of total spending. Actually, it exceeds that, I guess, with a $7 billion budget and a $1 billion Medicaid state share of the program. You can see kind of where we land there. And then corrections is after that, and then debt interest, debt service, and then really service, and then really the rest of government. But education, let's focus on that. You were mentioning before we went to break that we've seen the expense of education increase. You said 28%.
I think 28% in 4 years.
In 4 years. And outcomes, we have to be honest, outcomes certainly have improved. The governor has really promoted that, but I don't know that that's necessarily a function. He certainly doesn't say it is a function of the fact that we're spending more money. He says it's conservative policies.
Well, the number of students in the public school system has fallen.
Right, so we're spending more, and we got fewer people that we're serving.
So the question is, where's the money gone? Now, some of it legitimately is improving teacher pay, and I think it's only fair to say that teacher pay had been held back, and it was right to increase that to catch up. But not all of it went on teacher pay. There's been an explosion in the number of non-teaching staff on the payroll. Think of your local high school. There often will be a lot of people doing things that just weren't there 20 years ago. Weren't there 10 years ago. And that is where a lot of it's gone. Now, I could say that a lot of it is to do with the bloated fat cat salaries of the school superintendents, but even those on $200,000, $250,000 a year aren't responsible for the entirety of the increase. But the problem is, as many people point out, the money is not getting into the classroom, and that, I think, is another reason why we need school choice. Because if you can take your child's pot of $7,000 and you can take it to a school of your choice, you're going to make sure that those $7,000 are converted into outcomes in the classroom and not into hiring another bureaucrat in the local school superintendent's office.
Yeah. And so I mentioned to you on the break, I just wonder if it would make sense to conduct an exercise where you just did a detailed contrast across a series of operational metrics of the high-performing districts and the low-performing districts.
It'd be fascinating, wouldn't it? I mean, you've got some very well-run school board districts like Clinton and DeSoto County. Now, they tend to be quite large, those ones, but it would be fascinating if the people who ran those counties sat down with the guys who run some of the less well-performing ones and say, okay, how do you spend money to do X, Y, and Z? And I think that would be very revealing.
Encouraging our legislature to consider commissioning such an analysis. I think it would be very informative and very insightful. And I'm not sure how much these districts communicate and collaborate with each other to find out, hey, what are you doing that works or doesn't work? I don't know.
Probably quite a painful process, because if you've been running things a certain way and it's not great, you don't want to fess up to it, but maybe sunlight's the best disinfectant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I share with you that this is an exercise we used to do in the private sector among my peers, meet once a quarter, and you were required to disclose all your deep, dark secrets, good or bad, and you'd just be exposed to the group, and they to you, and you'd compare yourself to all of them. And you learn a lot. I learned more from that than anything else, honestly. Just being around people. Oh, you're doing that, and that's working for you. And maybe we could share something that's working for us that they were struggling with, vice versa. Maybe that sort of private sector approach could work here in government, certainly in education as well, when we have these. Because it makes no sense. We got an A sitting right next to an F.
I think so. And the assumption has been, well, that's just the way it is. And I don't think that works anymore. If we want Mississippi to be prosperous, we need to fix public education.
Yeah, you're so right about that. That's a great point. This idea of, well, we just always done it that way. I just don't ever want to hear that. That's what I used to say. That's tradition for the sake of tradition and nothing else. Yeah. I mean, there's no really rationale for that. So, but you talked about we got to be responsible from a spending perspective. Education, of course, half of that we've seen, as you indicate, an increase of that. But in all likelihood, we're going to see a decline in revenues as we phase out the income tax. Now, I know we could certainly argue at the federal level where we apply the Laffer curve, there's kind of an optimum tax rate and tax environment for producing more revenue, and you go on either side of that and you produce less. I'm not sure that applies when you're zero, when your rate's zero.
Certainly the amount of revenue from income tax is going to diminish because when you get to zero in 2030, whatever.
Zero.
But I think if the growth rate we've had over the past 4 years continues, and I reiterate the point, there's been more economic growth in the past 5 years than over the previous 15. If that continues, overall tax revenue is going to go up. Now, we mustn't bank on it, but this is the miracle of growth. Once you begin to see the growth and that generates the higher tax revenues, if you can control spending, you then enter this virtuous circle of constant small surpluses but rising revenue, and that's where we need to try and steer the economy in Mississippi.
So one thing I would point out, I hear you, and I agree, and that's hopefully that will be the outcome, is that unless that translates to increased consumption and thus sales taxes, you're not going to have an increase in revenue. So we need a whole lot more people to move to Mississippi.
And that's beginning to happen.
I mean, a lot.
Yeah, we've had $19 billion of inward investment in the past 4 years. $19 billion. In a state of 3 million people, that is significant. I suspect
no doubt.
The official data hasn't quite caught up with reality, but I think Mississippi, for the first time in 2 generations, is a net importer of people now. We're starting to see the growth. Look around Mississippi. There's a lot of growth on the coast. People are moving to Hattiesburg and Laurel, sometimes perhaps aided by a TV show. They're moving to Oxford and Starkville. They're moving to Flowood and Madison. Yeah. This is exactly every new housing development, every new factory. These are more revenue-paying tax generators, and we need more of that.
Just to do the math, go through the math though, and get your thoughts on this. To replace the lost income from revenue from income taxes, we would need to consume about more than a third of what we currently consume. Yeah, I mean that's a huge increase in spending.
We spend $7 billion. $2 billion of that comes from income. So
that's right.
How do you find that?
2.2 roughly.
Yeah. How do you find that? The short answer is restraining public spending and growth. And you can do this if you achieve growth. If we continue to have the sort of growth we've had over the past 4 or 5 years, we can do this. The problem is that politicians have a habit of not doing the policies they need to generate the growth. If you got rid of all the restrictions on healthcare, that would boost the economy because healthcare is a really important part of spending. If you had school choice, that would boost the economy. If you removed some of the intentionally restrictive rules that Mississippi seems to specialize in, that would boost the economy. It can be done, but it's imperative. Mississippi has momentum. You've heard the governor say that, and he's not wrong. He's right. No doubt. Mississippi has momentum, but we need to keep that momentum by continuing the pro-growth reform agenda that people like Trey Lamar and Jason White are pushing for.
Yeah, I agree. There's no doubt that the governor has spearheaded a lot of this economic growth and momentum, and Mississippi is poised quite well in that regard, and I do think that will pay huge benefits. And I applaud the governor for being hyper-focused on that. Yeah. I mean, that's the way, I believe, to address so many of the key challenges we have in the states with economic growth.
But this is why it's so important that the pro-growth reformers like Jason White and Trey Lamar prevail against the status quo guys, because if the status quo guys continue to block reform, this whole thing will stall. And the problems you identify will come to the fore. Let's drive through school choice. Let's drive through certificate of need repeal. Let's make Mississippi competitive the way Arkansas is, the way Alabama is. It pains me to say, I'm not a native Mississippian, but I don't like seeing the Razorbacks do stuff that we could be doing. We're a much better state than they are. Let's embrace these reforms.
And while we're doing it, let's promote the fact that we're doing that. Let's get the message out to the entire nation.
I did my bit in the White House a couple of weeks ago, and it was such an honor and a privilege to be able to talk up what Mississippi is doing and doing. We've been a laggard for so long. We're not a laggard anymore. If we get these things right, we can be first at some things.
Yeah.
And that's what's so exciting about this.
Before you go, let's turn our attention to federal policy. We're trying to get the one big, beautiful bill through and get these tax cuts extended. What do you think?
I'm in favor of tax cuts, but I worry about the debt. If you cut taxes but you don't cut spending, you basically give your grandkids a headache. And I don't want... I've moved to America. I've escaped a high-tax socialist system. I don't want America to become like Europe. So, yes to tax cuts, but you've got to cut federal spending.
And it looks like we're on a pace at this point in the fiscal year to produce about a $2.6 trillion deficit.
That is, sooner or later, you're going to be dealing with some serious money.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Appreciate you coming in, Douglas.
Thanks so much. Thanks.
Douglas Carswell, President and CEO of Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Coming right back in the Element Wealth Studio.